You know, Steve, our prevailing value, our core value as a school system is that we celebrate diversity. I said, cool, let's write that on a piece of butcher paper, and we did, and we put it up on the wall. Then we went through this model. I said, give me a result you don't like. And they said, well, our disadvantaged minority kids are not achieving at the level we want them to achieve. I said, okay, let's work our way through this and see where you are, because the first step in change is not change. The first step in change is diagnosis. So let's take a look at where we are. So what are you doing to cause that result about those disadvantaged minority kids not achieving to the level you want? They were very able to tell me. Then the question I asked was, so why are you doing those things? And it took a while, but one of the vice principals stood up and said, I might lose my job for saying this, Steve, but you know what we wrote down as our core value? We celebrate diversity. That's not our core value. Our real core value is we either celebrate, accept, or barely tolerate diversity depending on who you are and where you are in the district. I said, well, thanks for having the courage to say that. And by the way, that core value does predict the behaviors that you've just identified and does predict the result you're getting. So the key issue here is that when you're trying to make change within a system, you can't just say to people, change your behavior. You also have to really respectfully challenge the mindset that people have, the way they see the world. Because I will tell you for a fact that if you ask people to do things that are inconsistent with their mindset, the way they see the world, over time they will revert to behaviors that are consistent with the way they see the world. Does that make sense? Some of the interesting districts that I'm working with that I'm really worried about most are ones that are fairly high achieving, and they've got a bunch of teachers who have been using whatever they've been doing as teachers, and the kids have been achieving to very high levels, mostly because of what the kids walk in with in terms of their genetic ability to learn fast. And then the demographics change. And then the teachers keep doing the same thing they always did, and the kids aren't learning. Anybody dealing with that in the room? It's a difficult issue, I think. It's a very difficult thing for people to confront their mindset about what might be causing the trouble. So again, what can we do? Let's get serious. We're going to get more and more practical about this as we go on. This is one of my favorite school system superintendents in the nation. He's from Miami-Dade. I don't know if any of you know about that school district in Florida, but it's a really tough place. This superintendent came in and he said, enough. We've got 14 schools that are rated F by the state of Florida. I'm not going to have this, and I'm going to fix it now. And within 2 years, none of his schools were rated F. What he said to teachers who wanted to become principals, he said, that's a fine thing if you want to become a principal, but you've got to show me 2 years of data that shows significant growth from your students because of your teaching. If you can't show me that, don't apply to become a principal. Why would I want you to become a principal if you haven't figured that out? He said we've got to tackle all aspects of reform at the same time. And as McCarthy said in 2002, systems do trump programs. That's the point. I mentioned this morning this great work by Marzano and Waters on district leadership that works. Here's their basic model that I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Notice that there's an alignment between collaborative goal setting, board alignment, allocation of resources, non-negotiable goals for achievement and for instruction. For our school board member who's here, there's an interesting statement that is made by Marzano and Waters about this that is consistent with another wonderful book called The Reluctant Board Member. And this is a really kind of a growing trend in the research that there needs to be a lot of flexibility and lateral kind of conversation, except for one thing, and that's formal communication that has to be a straight line from the board down to the teacher and the parents, and formal accountability up in a straight line. So the board hires one person, the CEO, called the superintendent. The superintendent then has responsibility for the staff. The staff then interact with the schools. The schools, the principals and all that interact with the teachers who interact with the kids, and then interacting with the families, and then back again. And those systems that do not violate that communication and accountability are more successful. Okay? And the constant battle that you face as a concerned citizen on a board is, well, wait a second, I've got to get involved in administration, because if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be able to really see what's going on in the school system. according to this research, you should never do that. You should keep putting the pressure on administration to get better results, but only keep yourself involved in basic policy that are non-negotiables above what the district does. So these non-negotiables for achievement, non-negotiables for instruction, and then isn't it weird that you have collaborative goal setting in the context of non-negotiables? That's the this is counterintuitive actually to think about it that way, but that's the model that seems to be working best. So there was a good piece of work that was done by a professor from the University of South Florida who's since moved to the University of North Carolina, whose name is Dean Fixen, F-I-X-S-E-N, and he's an expert at something called implementation research. And what he did for 30 years basically without telling anyone, I don't know how he did this, but he did this 30 years of research and then all of a sudden published this huge monograph that I had on my book list that I gave to folks this morning. And this monograph in great detail talks across disciplines, the human service arena, about what needs to happen if you're going to have change that lasts. What do you need to do? And one of the great studies that is presented in education is done by 3 of the very best researchers in the United States on education, Carolyn Denton and Sharon Bond and Jack Fletcher. And in 2003, they talked about factors that seem to influence sustainability of high-quality implementation. So let's take a look at this for a minute, because I think this applies both to print and to technology interventions. If you don't get acceptance and commitment to the program by the teachers, obviously it's not going to last. That's not going to work, right? A former boss of mine in our business had a use it, like it scale. He said if teachers use it, it's good. If they like to use it, it's even better. You know, so you could make a tier 3 intervention that's intensive so complex, or you could make something like the magnificent Kurzweil program so complex, it's really wonderful. It's really, really wonderful, but it's really complex. If people don't use it, is it really good? Is the question. You need the presence of a strong school site facilitator to support those teachers as they acquire proficiency in the execution of the intervention, of the innovation. Now, here's the argument I'm having with my son-in-law, Ben. He and I are both good cooks. He believes that, that there is a word that I thought was in the dictionary, but he doesn't think it's in the dictionary. The word is recipe. And he doesn't believe in recipes. And I really believe in recipes. What I love to do that drives my wife nuts is we have 8 or 12 people over for dinner, and I like to go into the most complex cookbook or website I can and find all new stuff to cook for that evening, and I follow those recipes to the T, to exactly what it says about how much you should put in everything, because I figure, who am I to second guess this magnificent chef until I am proficient at making that dish. Once I am proficient at making that dish, and I've proven that I could do it 2 or 3 or 4 times, now I can play a little and see if I can add my own zest to it, is my perspective. Ben's perspective is, you know, just put a little of this and a little of that and it's fine. So he will not answer the question when I ask him, so Ben, does your style of cooking always work? Because my style of cooking always works, because I follow the recipe. So I'm going to suggest to you that notion of acquiring proficiency in the execution of what you're trying to do as a program, be it technology or print, it's essential that you hold people accountable to fidelity of implementation. That's the issue. Until they are thoroughly proficient in its use, then they can start playing to see if it works. Now, all of that is a meaningless conversation if you actually make decisions on the basis of data. You know, so the way Ben and I have stopped our conversation about this and given each other a hug is, well, Ben, the test of this is whether or not people like the meal and they get sick or not after the meal's over, you know? That's the test. So the next one is unambiguous buy-in on the part of all staff in the school, empowering teachers to take ownership and responsibility for the process of change. Schools or districts must agree to follow procedures designed to ensure high-fidelity implementation, collecting data, as I've mentioned. Feelings of professionalism and self-determination amongst teachers is the next sustainability issue. I'm going to see if I can stop that from blinking like it did. Still, are those my eyes, or is it doing that? It's my eyes. Thank you, David, very much. That was cute. But feelings of professionalism and self-determination amongst teachers, and teachers provided with professional development that helps them to really get to it. And then the teachers have to also perceive these programs as practical, useful, and beneficial. If they don't view it that way, then they don't keep doing it. Now, how do you get people to get that buy-in is the question. There was a study done at the University of Oregon by a man named Russell Gersten, and he got a school district to try this, and I would not recommend this necessarily, but it was an interesting experiment. They were going to implement a program that's called Reading Mastery. It's a very scripted program, big D, big I, direct instruction. And the teachers in that school were absolutely antithetically opposed to even trying something so stupid as those scripts. The problem with those scripts is that if you could actually get people to use them over time, guess what happens to kids? They learn, okay? They learn at high levels, but teachers don't do it because they get tired of the scripts and they stop doing the scripts, and there it is. So here's what Russell convinced the superintendent he could do. Superintendent walks into the school, says in August, in a week before the school is going to start, you know, we're going to plan to do some different things this week, in this week of preparation, but what's going to happen is you're all going to learn how to use Reading Mastery, and there's not a choice. We are implementing Reading Mastery next week, and we expect you to implement these scripts as they're written. We have coaches from the University of Oregon who will be here to help you to do it, but remember, you're going to do it. Oh, well, wait a minute, that's not the way we make decisions around here. He said, I don't care how we make decisions, you're going to do this. So grumble, 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 grumble. They got to start the school, and then 3 months later, they looked at the data, and the kids were like skyrocketing in terms of their achievement. And the superintendent walked back into a school meeting and said, you know, I just want to apologize to all of you. We were trying an experiment to see if we could actually get people to do something in a thoroughly top-down way. So we're going to take it out of the school now, and you can go back to what you're using, because that wasn't fair of us to do it that way for you. And the teacher said, if you take this out of the school, we're all quitting. Because in this case, this one case, they found that the teachers were suckers for only one thing: kids learning. So I have found in my career, and David, see if you agree with this point, that it seems to me that even really top-down approaches can work if you provide the appropriate support.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's the weird thing. Don't think that it has to be bottom-up swelling of an idea. That's the only way of getting things done, because there really isn't too much evidence that that works. The next one, administrative support and leadership. Instructional practices valued by the school leaders. Administration has long-term support for professional development, as I've mentioned, and you're assessing implementation and student performance to make sure that it's meeting needs. That's the issue. This is the model that we're going to use, and we're going to go through this model step by step and talk about how technology and print can be synergized for this purpose. The way this model was developed, so you know, it was developed by our company. I was the first big customer of this little company in Longmont, Colorado back in 1990 or so, and I bought this online toolbox for teachers that had behavioral tactics on it that we're still publishing, and we've updated it 5 or 6 times, called RIDE, Responding to Individual Differences in Education. So teachers put in characteristics of kids, and then what pops up are 5 research-based tactics. You can print the tactic, you can see a video on the tactic, there it is. That's the approach. I thought that would help us as we tried early experiments with this thing called RTI. Well, I spent $200,000 on that to put it in all the schools in the state of Utah. I didn't know that that was 20% of the yearly revenue for that little company in Colorado. So when they got this little PO for 20% of their revenue for the year, they went, whoa, and they called me and they said, you're our new best friend. And they really wanted to really partner with me because I spent that money with them. Well, I was very happy to do that because they only publish stuff that works. So what we began to work on is, how do we tell a school what it needs to do if it wants to, in a systemic way, meet the needs of all kids and have high achievement for all kids? We began to develop a model. The model started with that triangle in the middle that was called the all-some-few triangle. That was before the triangle became the tattoo that you have to have if you want to be in the RTI Revolutionary Army. And I have one. David has one too. Should we show him right now?
You go first.
I'm first. Okay, good. No, I actually don't have one of those. But that's the triangle tattoo. Meeting the needs of all kids and some kids and few kids. Well, that wasn't enough to help schools. So we began to conceptualize this systems change model called closing the achievement gap. As I mentioned this morning, if you want the benchmarks that go along with this